If you're ready to learn how technology is driving business innovation in Cincinnati and beyond, you're tuned in to the right podcast. Join us for interviews and discussions with business leaders, innovators, and visionaries. With our host, Sam Schulte, CEO of Unstoppable Software. This is Unstoppable Talk.
Okay, we are here today with JT Badiani. JT is the president of Focused Improvement Consulting up in the Greater Toronto, Canada area. JT is a professional chemical engineer and an MBA, as well as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. JT, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Sam. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, JT, how did you get started and how did you get into this field?
So, interesting story. I was a chemical engineer. I did a ton of work in various companies like GE, Bombardier, Molson, breweries. Did some work in automotive. And then about 7-8 years ago, I was about to venture into my own and buy a company. So I was, a VP of operations. So I ran pretty much most of the company, except for a few departments. And the objective was for me to eventually take over and run that company. Well, things didn't work out, and I did not end up running that company, and we parted ways. And so I was sitting at home kicking the tires on a number of companies when one of the first companies I took a look at, they gave me a shout and said, "Hey, are you interested in working with us on a couple of projects? You came and looked at our company and we're really interested in buying it, but I know things didn't work out, but we certainly can use your help to, make some improvements." So I did a short stint, and then I got referred to another client from there, and then did another short stint on that. And I came home from that second gig, and I said to my wife, "Well, I could go back and start looking for a company." And she goes, "You have one. Why are you looking for a company?" Right. Mm-hmm. And that was the start of the consulting business. So I did that for a short period of time, ended up going to PwC, where I worked as a lean practitioner and in their operations consulting practice. Did a number of projects there, and then eventually came back to my own about 4 or 5 years ago, and have been running the company ever since.
Cool. Very cool. And so what we wanted to talk about today was basically talking about the background and advantages of applying Lean or Six Sigma approaches in your business, some of the case studies you've got and background stories there, and also how technology is sort of driving and forcing companies to innovate around how they apply Six Sigma and changing that landscape. Maybe a good place to start before we go into it further is for listeners that might not be familiar with it, what is Six Sigma and what is Lean and what are those programs and why are they beneficial to folks?
Okay, so let me start with what is Lean, right? So, when people hear the word Lean, you think different things, but the way Womack and Jones many, many years ago wrote about Lean was it's a business philosophy based on the fundamental goal of continuously minimizing waste to maximizing flow, right? And the term Lean refers to the absence of waste. That's the concept that everybody should have. So if you look at any company, right, we have to focus on delivering customer value. Every business has value streams, so we should define those value streams. We need to then think about how do we create continuous flow. Now, I look at flow in two different ways. I look at flow from a product, so if you're manufacturing something or a service that you're delivering, but also information. In today's society, right, technology and the flow of data and the flow of information is phenomenal. So how do we make sure that both are in sync as you're delivering your service or your product, and so the customer gets everything that they need, or internally we deliver, from one stage to another, the right information to make the right decisions. The other concept I think that Lean really focuses on are, customers pull the work. So demand is created at the customer level, and it flows back into the business so that each work center or work cell or area, supports the demand that was created by the station after it. And then lastly, we strive for perfection. And so those are the guiding principles of lean. Why do people do lean? It's all about employee engagement. It's about cost reduction. It's about improving customer service. It's about process design or business process improvement. And then lastly, and often, which a lot of people forget, is it's a cultural transformation, right? Where you focus on value, quality, people, and you change the behaviors of the company so that you strive for perfection. You strive for delivering on customer value. A typical company has roughly 50% waste in its organization. Right? So everything we do in a company, 50% of it is waste.
I believe it.
Right? And then 25% of it is value added, real value added that the customer pays for. So our goal is to minimize the waste in the company and get it down to as low as possible, and hence the ownership, whether it be shareholders or privately owned, you get better bottom line results. So that's what lean is about. Six Sigma refers to, Six Sigma is standard deviation, so a statistical unit of measure, right, of a set of data. Six Sigma is a measure of variability, right? So let me take a step back. So many years ago, right, the principles of continuous improvement, which were developed by guys like Deming, Schuhart, they were brought to Japan during World War II. And then what happened was Motorola took a look at a lot of the things that were being done in Japan, and they had issues in their plants, and they started taking that sort of set of tools and looked at data that were coming out of their processes and created this concept of Six Sigma. And Six Sigma is the number of deviations from the mean to its to the upper spec limit or lower spec limit, depending on which way you're going. So the goal of Six Sigma is to listen to the voice of the customer, listen to the voice of the business, understand what your requirements are, so your upper and lower spec limits or your upper and lower limits, and then measure performance against those requirements or those limits, and then find a way to reduce the variation and shift the mean so that it's targeted to where the customer expects it. So that's what Six Sigma is all about: reducing the variation, shifting the mean, and targeting it. So the focus is all about variation, understand where it comes from, whether it's from the supplier, from the process, from your inputs, and you measure it, at the output level, which is what the customer feels the most. And then you drive, root cause analysis to make improvements in your processes. And we do things like rapid improvement events, or we have various belts that get created out of it. So there's a white belt, which is at the associate level or the ground floor employee. A yellow belt, typically at a lead hand or a supervisor level. You have black belts, which are technical people, so it could be engineers or managers or lead hands that have a little bit more technical capability or leadership. And then you get master black belts who then teach and train others in the theory of Lean Six Sigma or Six Sigma within the organization. They also have to deliver projects, right?
I see.
Right? So if we take a look at either one of those types of methodologies, Lean or Six Sigma, they both have goals you have to achieve. Could be a reduction in defects, could be a reduction in waste, could be an improvement in variation. But what a Six Sigma project typically delivers is roughly So if you're doing a greenbelt project, it's probably around $100,000 to $300,000 in savings over a year, and a black belt should be able to deliver multiple projects if they're dedicated to a role, continuous improvement role. Roughly $1 million savings annually.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
No, those are great descriptions. Because it's a lot of times those words get thrown around and folks don't really get a real understanding of what they mean at the basic level. So no, that's great. And how did you originally learn Six Sigma and get certified in it? What occasion in your career sort of pulled you into it?
So great question. I was actually moved into a program management or project management role. We were in the midst of designing a new fridge when I worked at GE. So this was going to be a 3-door or 2-door with a bottom mount, drawer fridge. We hadn't decided which design we were going to do. And Jack Welch at that time, put an edict out saying that all projects must be quote unquote Six Sigma. We were roughly about 9 months, a year into our project. The project was supposed to last for about 2.5 years. So we were roughly halfway through or 40% through. And so the project came to a grinding halt, and we had to go and learn this thing called Six Sigma. So here we are in a classroom. At that time, black belts received 5 weeks of training. So we sat in on 5 weeks of training, and we were unleashed and said, make our product Six Sigma. And so we figured out, through bumps and bruises and scraping our knee and, trial and error of what it meant to be Six Sigma. And so here's a really cool example of how we used Six Sigma. So if you take a look at your fridge today, and let's say, you have a 3-door or 2 doors, French doors, and a bottom mount, right? And if you take a look at the gap between the left-hand door and the right-hand door, we didn't know this, but we did a number of experiments to determine what does the human eye see in parallelisms. So, you have your 2 doors parallel. What's the biggest gap or difference in gap that an eye can see? And so we had people walk up to a series of doors, and we asked them, does this these doors look parallel? Yes or no? And we figured out that a human eye can detect roughly a 40 thou difference from let's say top to bottom. And so we then use
40 thou, you said? Is that the measurement?
Yeah, 40 thou measurement, right? So if the gap
so what is that, 40,000th of
an inch?
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, yeah. So if your fridge is, let's say, 1/2 inch gap at the top, and it's wider by 40 thou at the bottom, the human eye can detect it. If you stand at a certain distance, and I can't remember what that was, I think it was like 4 feet, 3 feet. So, what we tried to simulate was if you're at a store and you're buying a fridge and you see our fridge out there, and you're looking at it and go, oh, I'm not going to buy this because the doors are crooked. It's not well made. We didn't want that to happen, right? Or even worse, you buy the fridge and it gets delivered into your house. It goes through a series of bumps, going up the stairs or down the stairs into your house. Eventually it gets to your kitchen and it gets rolled in, and the doors are all crooked, and the magnets don't line up with the frame of the door. And now you have heat leaking in or cold leaking out, and your fridge is now going to have a service call. So we used that data to design our fridge. So we said, okay, maximum is about 40 thou. What does that mean? So we took that element of the design and said our tolerances have to be such that to be Six Sigma, it can't be more than 40 thou. So we have to have around a 4, 5, 6 thou tolerance in certain aspects of our design. So we have to beef up our hinges. We had to make our gaskets that much bigger. We had to make sure that we had enough plastic at the bottom of the design so that air would be, flowing up into the fridge rather than out if the gaskets didn't hit the landing properly. So, those are all the different considerations that went in to make the design Six Sigma. And it took a lot of time, a lot of effort. We learned a lot, and that was probably the greatest learning I ever had in my career. When I was applying Lean Six Sigma principles, not only in the design of the product, but on the factory floor. We used a lot of Lean principles on the factory floor.
So you worked on designing refrigerators, but I understand you also worked on other refrigerated products earlier, namely ice cream at some point.
Yes.
Was that before that you were working in that factory?
No, actually, it was after that. So I was, I was a leader of the Canadian manufacturing site here in Canada for one of the major ice cream brands, retailers. So I led that group for about 3.5, 4 years. Unfortunately, we shut the plant down and moved production to the U.S. from Canada to the U.S. But
outsourcing jobs to the U.S. Huh?
Yes, that's right. Right. The interesting thing was we applied a lot of Lean philosophy and thinking at the ice cream facility. You never think that you would be doing that in a continuous flow environment, but a simple thing was we did a Lean Six Sigma project on the fill weight on ice cream. We had a ton of variation as to from tub to tub as to how much ice cream was going into the tub. So we started looking at it from a Lean Six Sigma perspective and did a project on it. And, made a series of discoveries through root cause analysis, 5 whys and fishbone diagrams and process mapping. So we improved our control system. We improved our weigh scales. We improved our pumps, so that they delivered the right quantity. We made some piping and equipment changes. So a series of improvements were made, and that helped manage the amount of ice cream we were putting into the tub so that there wasn't too much. Because obviously, if you put too much ice cream, you're giving away money. But worse is if you put too little and you don't deliver the quantity that's stated on the label, you could be in trouble with the government, right? With weights and measures. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually kind of know what you mean about continuous flow, just because I was reading recently about, we have a couple medium and or large sized ice cream manufacturers here in Cincinnati, and one of the famous ones, Grater's, which is a smaller company, they do individual pots, basically, of the old-fashioned way, where it's more or less handmade. And then, of course, all the larger industrial ones, they have these continual flow freezing, I can't remember the name exactly, but, freezing tube, essentially, that it's just always running through it in a big, auger or something, I guess, mixing ingredients. So I suppose in that environment, like you said, there's only so many kind of along that production line inside of the continuous flow. There's only so many things you can kind of change because it's just marching down the line, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's more the outputs and stuff of it, I guess. So
yeah,
I see. And so what was your first big break after you were sort of working in those fields that, one of the biggest clients you first got, and what were some of the real game-changing things you got to do with your business after that time?
So, one of the best clients I had was a pulp and paper company out of the U.S. They, their processes were somewhat stable. Call it that. They, at times they were really, really stable, and they hit the specs. But other times, variability crept in, and so. We got called to go down and help them do a series of rapid improvement projects on one of their big paper making lines. And so we spent roughly 5 sessions that were about 3 to 5 days each, depending on which one it was. And we started working through the production line. We had a very large cross-functional team. So there was about 15 to 20 people. So, we had production staff, we had maintenance, engineering, manufacturing engineering or process engineering. We had the PLC coding guys, application engineers, and then we had technical leaders, so who were experts in paper making, and we had other experts from various suppliers in the room in this project team. And so this diverse group of folks were given a very targeted mandate. And the mandate was to find a way to improve the line speed. So we weren't hitting rate, or we weren't hitting line speed. It was a very, very specific target we were given. It was general enough that, we broke off into 4 teams. Each team, after a brainstorming session, we then targeted those 4 teams and what we considered were the top 4 issues. And so each team did a sub-project across 5 sessions to improve those 4 areas. And each team did a mini Lean Six Sigma project and applied a lot of the tools and the cultural piece. And we trained a lot of people along the way. And that project was a phenomenal success. It led a lot of improvements in speed, and we found other issues around quality, and those became spun off into other projects that this pulp and paper company then focused in on to make improvements. So phenomenal impact to the bottom line, and the business got paper quality that made the right weight and targeted the process to achieve that weight. A lot of the times, and with this project, there was a lot of focus on using technology to make sure that the changes that we made or learned about were implemented and stuck, year over year. And so we did a lot of things around center lining the process. So out on the shop floor, we put markers and we scribed where things needed to be put when you're running certain weights, a product on the line. But additionally, with all the control systems that are in a production line, in a paper making line now, we made software changes that rung alarms when certain set points were not being achieved, or if they went out of line.
Cool.
Let's take a quick break. This podcast is sponsored by Unstoppable Software, a Cincinnati-based technology consulting firm. At Unstoppable Software, we bolt on to your company's team and accelerate their ability to deliver custom software development projects. With our deep experience in manufacturing, engineering, and healthcare, we can tailor systems for process improvement, data analytics, machine learning, and document workflow, so they become a user-friendly, perfect fit for your employees and the way they want to work. To learn more about how we make our clients unstoppable, visit us at unstoppablesoftware.com or call us at 513-382-8499. And now, back to Unstoppable Talk.
So we talked a little bit before about some of the ROI that clients are getting based on sort of the different belt levels you might have. It's sort of what kind of ROI they might be expected to deliver. What are some of the ways you measure that? It seems like in some of these projects you have to have an actual structured, valid way of measuring the savings, or else it could sort of all just be a little too loose.
You're absolutely right. So in one of the early phases of a Lean Six Sigma project, the measure phase, we establish what instruments or devices or how we're going to measure our key variable, right? Our big Y. And we actually test the measurement system to ensure that we can detect a change. So we do what's called a gauge R&R. And if the gauge can detect a change, then you know what? We've got the right gauge, and we can then use that gauge as we work through the project. If not, then we stay in that measure phase until we develop the right gauge. So very early on, if we were to go back very early in my career, we didn't have that capability to measure certain change. But now that sensors and technology has improved substantially over the last 10, 15 years, we can now take a lot of these technologies and put them into processes. A simple example was, I take a look at what we did at the ice cream plant. After the tub of ice cream was full, we would then move it to the next station, and before the lid went on, we would take a picture. Well, that camera system that we were using was thousands of dollars. It was probably about $50,000. And, the recognition software that went with it, training it and, helping us detect an out of control situation or defect in the product, it was really difficult to do. Now, detection systems are much, much, much less. And the software is so much improved that it's easy to use. So measuring things has gotten a lot less expensive. Additionally, it's gotten a lot smarter. And so, we can take technology and utilize it very, very effectively to measure change, measure the impact on the process, measure how things need to flow in the future, and tell us if something has gone out of control really, really well. So we use that measurement device or devices to understand what that change is, and you quantify that change into dollars. So, it could be how much weight are you overfilling a tub of ice cream to, how much of a fluid goes through the pipe before things have to change, to how much waste are we leaving on the floor if you're doing some metalwork type of activity, how much waste are you leaving, CNCing, a sheet of metal, how much waste are you leaving in the trays after the product's been cut. So, there's really good ways now to measure what success looks like.
And I'm imagining, of course, when you're setting all this up, these matrices and stuff, that's part of what you use to select which projects to actually work on, some of that sort of setup. But what else do you do to be able to actually select which Lean Six Sigma project to move forward with?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of companies do projects for the sake of projects, right? So what I like to do is I like to always ask the following questions. Why are we doing this project? What is the impact to the customer? What is the impact on the business? And, how will we move the needle on, safety, quality, delivery, or cost with this project? And if there's no direct linkage to, a strategic initiative or one of those variables, then I often question the management team and say, is this the right project to do? Right? If it doesn't go that way, then let's not do it. Let's focus on something that's really, really important. Then the other thing I ask is if it's a big nugget, it's a big juicy problem, can we break that problem into sub projects? Because what you don't want is, a poor black belt with a team of 3, 4, 5 people working on a project, the same project for a long period of time and not achieving any results. So you put small teams together, and, I call them bandit projects, where you band a bunch of teams together, almost like a chain, right? Where you've got the links, and you link those projects together, and over a short period of time, within 3-4 months, you solve that big problem. But you need good communication within the team to make sure that everyone is lining up and they have a really good narrow scope of focus, so that you don't have overlaps and people stepping on toes and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I've done both, and I prefer the linked methodology of tackling a big project. And then within those projects, we do what I call rapid improvement projects or rapid improvement events. And so that accelerates the implementation or the learning, so that the business realizes gains a lot faster.
Yeah, it's interesting just, from our working together and when you really look at some of these processes and such, how many similarities there are to all of the popular software development methodologies that I work in on a daily basis, just because I mean, what do we work on? Milestones of small teams, iterative development. We don't want to have too long of a software project where you're not delivering value, right? Just exactly the same thing you just said. Or even when you're evaluating projects, one of my mentors always said that, if you're at a startup software company and there's a feature in the software that's not tied to a revenue opportunity, it needs to be cut, period, right? It's just fluff otherwise, right? So it's funny because you can see the influence. That's where Agile and stuff gained a lot of influence, is from these manufacturing approaches. It's kind of interesting how the similarities there. And I guess kind of along the same lines, what are some of the biggest ways that you've seen manufacturing technology impact Six Sigma and some of these other programs? You mentioned some of the recognition and detection things that you've implemented. But what are some other manufacturing technologies that have sort of changed that landscape?
So I think there's two big fundamental streams of impact coming through. So, you take a look at ERPs or MRPs or software to control the business, like whatever you're using, right? And what a lot of companies are doing is they're jumping very quickly into implementing an ERP without really understanding their processes. So I worked with a manufacturer here in Toronto, and we used a very systematic approach prior to implementing the ERP. And what we did was we mapped out a lot of their their value streams, and said, if we want to get this product out, what are the series of steps that it needs to take? And so we ended up mapping out 3 streams. And so we classified their business into 3 types of product. We called it a simple product, a standard product, and then a complex product. And each of these value streams had a really good set of steps that were defined with inputs and outputs, and responsibilities or accountabilities, if you use that profile, right? And we then stepped back before ERP folks came online and said, is this how we run our business through these 3 standard sort of activities and our value streams? And so the business came back and said yes, and then we brought the ERP folks in and we started mapping out the way the system's going to flow. And so there was that interaction of technology with, I call it real life, where we understood how product needs to gets out the door. And we started going back and forth and really said, we don't want to change the ERP process because that's going to cost us a lot of money. There's already money put into developing the base software. But at the same time, we don't want to lose focus on why we do what we do. And so when decisions had to be made, whether we would change a piece of code or not, we would always come back and say, what was the impact on the process, the people that work the process, and the customer? And so, we started going back and forth. And you know what? Often it came down to, we are going to make the code change because it's going to take some waste out of the system. And it'll make our processes that much better. And so we would flag those opportunities as we went back to the value stream map. And then the other thing we did was we then stepped back and said, what are other opportunities that we're doing today that we can automate? And so we then went back to the developers and said, hey, we've got these 10, 15 opportunities. Can you change your code? And what would the cost be? And then we did an ROI calculation. And wherever it made sense, we did the code change. And so when we went live, it was so smooth. Actually, the company won an award for the best implementation in 2019. That's how well that implementation went. So, the software can interact with Lean Six Sigma, and Lean Six Sigma can, influence software. We also dovetailed in things like RPA, where, we made some repetitive tasks, programmed so that, it can happen behind the scenes. The next thing that's going to happen is artificial intelligence. So as we get more data, we understand how to use that data, how we can make faster decisions, and what can we get, a software or a computer to do behind the scenes that a human can do. I think that's the next level of change that's going to impact Lean Six Sigma. And I'm just starting to dabble in it a little bit. That's why I have, big brain guys like you helping me to learn a little bit more and, see how we can utilize it to be really effective.
Yeah, I think a good example that we've been discussing some on our side recently around artificial intelligence is if you look at a company out there, for instance, that's mixing a lot of ingredients for an end product. So let's say you're mixing 12 or 14 different raw materials into an end product. Along the way, at the end of that batch, they're going to QA and whatever it is they're making. It has to be adjusted sometimes and changed, right? Because it's slightly out of spec one way or the other. And the amounts and levels of those ingredients that you're putting in are what are throwing it off. But it's, of course, very tricky to figure out because it's such a sometimes big, long list of ingredients, what it is that's causing the problem, right? And so, we've been looking at and talking about, for instance, using some machine learning to try to predict what the sort of ingredients that are causing the problem are, so that we can warn the user, like, hey, actually don't put as much of this in. And so, maybe it's ice cream, for instance, right? If your end product is ending up having too much of one flavor or whatever, or something consistency wise to it, being able to spot that and predict that, sort of ahead of time and during the process, right? And those are things that in some industries they don't have a consistent product coming out the end, right? Maybe ice cream is a bad example.
Yeah.
So trying to use AI to determine why that is and try to make it more consistent, for instance, is probably a big application of it. So yeah,
I would agree. Actually, you just reminded me of another project that we did. Now I didn't do this. I was a coach on this one, but in the insurance business, when you have customers that call into your call center, and they go through the series of prompts, right? Hey, if you want this, you press 1. If you want this, press 2. And by the time you get to that first operator, you kind of have an idea what the problem is. We did this project to understand how we can improve the customer experience when you do call. And so we did what are called design of experiments at a call center. And, we looked at a number of variables: training, education, background, experience, knowledge of the products, knowledge of the services that are provided, and map those out. And then we did a series of exercises with real customers and then figured out how to make improvements. And so one of the outputs of that was, how can we, in real time, develop a method to get a customer sentiment. And so that's what the company's working on, so that the user, or not the user, but the customer leaves feeling a lot better at the end of the call, instead of being frustrated with the customer service person or with what was provided. Can't be perfect all the time, but we try to make it as best as possible. So yeah, it was a really, really cool project, and something where I learned a lot about how to use it in a completely different environment, as opposed to manufacturing. This is in a call center, Lean Six Sigma in a call center.
Yeah, and I think it's in that whole field of data science, it's about finding the answers hidden in the data that the eye can't see.
Yeah.
And then also figuring out if that answer means anything. Because there's a lot of, answers or intelligence that you can find hidden in the data, but they don't actually provide any lift or any beneficial change. It's like, oh, well, we see this trend. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you have to match sort of that input to the output of an actual beneficial change, right?
Yeah.
Correlation and causation and all that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some of the other sweet spots outside of manufacturing that you've been working on? You mentioned the call center there.
Yeah.
Where else are you seeing interesting applications of these of Six Sigma and Lean?
So I've seen it in a really few cool environments. So the first one I saw it in was engineered product. This company engineers a product. And we were looking at their engineering processes and the software that they use, and it was phenomenal, right? How much improvement you can make in a made to design engineer product company. So we've done some work around that. We've also done work with maintenance companies where they do service on equipment. So we've applied it there. We've also started to work with warehouses and transportation companies to optimize their flow in factories. Not factories, warehouses, and how they move product around. So Amazon is one of the examples that people use, but a lot of e-business retailers they have warehouses and they need to be extremely efficient and in order to be successful in that business, which is, very, very competitive. So we started to work with a lot of warehouses and transportation companies to reduce cost. I've also done some work in government. Applied Lean Six Sigma in government. We've also done some work in pharmacies. So we're starting to, work with pharmaceutical companies and pharmacies to improve their processes.
Interesting. And how are clients typically finding you, and how are you engaging with them out in the marketplace? I mean, how do you market your services, and what's your sort of most productive channel?
So my most productive channel is actually word of mouth. So I get a lot of referrals. And the second way of doing it is, things like what we're doing, which is a podcast. I do speaking engagements, or I'll go and network into a group where I can, speak. So I belong to a couple of, societies or groups where we get together with like-minded manufacturing type companies, and I share best practices. And the third way is through the website, right? So I'm trying to improve the website and have LinkedIn attached to it as best I can to generate interest, get some blogs out there and keep top of mind with a lot of companies.
And what is your website?
FocusedImprovement.ca.
Okay, great. And we mentioned this a little bit before about how a lot of the projects you do have to do with a rapid improvement workshop. What are some of the benefits folks get out of approaching things in that way as opposed to sort of other approaches you might do? And sort of, can you talk a little bit about how those workshops are structured?
Sure. So often, companies want results right away. They don't want to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 months doing a big project, and, they don't see the ROI very, very quickly. And particularly when I was in a leadership position, you want change to happen so that you can stop the bleeding, you put the bandage on, and then, you make another change maybe a little time later so that you get to your ultimate landing spot. And so these rapid improvement workshops or events do that. It's a 3 to 5, depending on the size of the problem, 3 to 5 day event where you get people in a room that are cross-functional with industry experts, and we tackle a specific problem, which is very, very focused. It could be on, instead of the entire production line, it could be on a piece of equipment that it's causing some problem on that production line. Or it could be a quality problem that we can then, dissect with a cross-functional team and, do root cause analysis, The key to a rapid improvement event are a few things. Number one is that we have a real clear problem statement that's defined. Number two, we have the right people in the room. So we may need technical experts. We need outside people, strong facilitation. The third thing is, the company must sort of give people time to work together for those 2, 3, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it ends up being. And also, and most importantly, is we implement something before we leave at the end of that 5th day. So things must change before we leave so that the company's better off. And then there's obviously some medium and long-term actions that come out of these events. And that's where individuals at that company can go in and start implementing, those longer-term actions.
Yeah. And I wonder if, I think when we first started talking about these workshops and this structure, probably the biggest mental objection that popped into my mind is, so if you're dealing with a very large facility, let's say, one of these mega manufacturing plants, how can you possibly change something after 5 days? How can you make any change that quickly? How do you kind of achieve that and actually pull that off?
So really good question, right? So the 5 days has different phases in it. So the first phase is problem definition. The second phase is a bit of training. So every time you get together, you want to train people on how to think and look at a problem, and the application of theory. So you want to teach them some theory around the Lean Six Sigma process. It's called DMAIC, so define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And then once you do that piece of it, then you take the problem and you start dissecting it. And the objective here is not to tackle the whole elephant, but to take a bite out of that elephant and eat it in small bites. So you may have to do 3 or 4 of these to make that elephant disappear or that problem disappear. But what you're doing at the end of that event is, hey, you've taken a step change, right? And then you come back after a period of time. Once your process is settled, you do another step change, and then you come back again and again until that whole process is fixed. It's not a miracle worker type of activity. It's incremental, plan, do, check, adjust cycle, where you plan the work, you do the work, you make sure that you've done all the right adjustments, and then you step back and do that whole cycle again, right? And you check to make sure that the implementation has gone well, and people have really taken ownership of and the accountability to make sure that the process doesn't fall back. So, there's a lot of activities, a lot of things that happen to make sure that, there's skill transference, there's accountability, there's responsibility, and that the leadership is on board.
Interesting. Yeah, and we've been brainstorming about ways that we could sort of work together on these workshops for customers, go out and sort of take something to market. And I think the interesting concept that we've sort of talked about, you had talked to a couple of your mentors out in and other folks in your industry, and that they see a large need or a lot of demand for with these sort of workshop programs to sort of dovetail in an IT perspective and a software perspective. Maybe can you talk a little bit about what those folks were seeing in the industry that you think drives that demand, or what is the need for that there?
Yes, so that's a great question. So as technology has improved and the cost of a lot of these devices has been plummeting, it is now at that critical stage where we can say, okay, how can we take this process, which has been around for so many years, and use technology along with Lean Six Sigma to make a significant step change? And so what we can do is, we can go into a company and take a step back and challenge the status quo and say, hey, let's take a look at a software solution with some AI behind it, And these particular type of IoT devices that can help you understand what your process is doing, and we take some decision making away from an operator that may have a bit of a lag or not even understand the process, and automate it. And so once we start doing that, the company or the business starts seeing significant change implemented very, very quickly. And so a lot of my colleagues and my mentors, actually, a few of them have applied this in industry, and they've seen ROIs that were 7, 8, 9 times, even 10 times the investment that they put in. So it's been significant improvements that I've seen in a very short period of time.
Yeah, no, I mean that's often the kind of ROI we see on projects, and I think the way I look at it is anytime you're sitting in a room working on a workshop, talking about changes to a workflow, which is essentially what you're sort of doing in any facility or any business situation. It might be a machine workflow or a human workflow. There's nowadays, always a technological tool that you can apply to that. I mean, there's so few instances that technology wouldn't be a factor or wouldn't touch. And, it's from a traceability standpoint, like you talked about, if it's a matter of measuring data with devices, it's from a prediction standpoint. If you're talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's from a visibility standpoint. If you're talking about dashboards, a lot of folks throw out all kinds of devices on their lines, but no one can really actually see in any kind of digestible way what's happening. It's certainly nothing that the customer wants to look at, right? So it seems like that would just inevitably be part of the conversation. So definitely that's going to be an interesting thing when we put it together to launch out there. And so we'll have a link to some information about that out on the podcast notes for this episode as well, for people to take a look at.
That'd be great. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah. Let's see. So we're also going to touch on a little bit some of the changes you've seen in the global economy and how they've sort of affected your clients in manufacturing and what they're really looking to change. Have those sort of global changes altered the things that they want to fix and the priority of things they want to look at for projects?
Yeah, so I'll give you the Canadian perspective first. So
yeah,
so Canada is going through a little bit of a tumultuous time in the economy. So 1 month we're up, 1 month we're down. So what a lot of manufacturers are looking at is, okay, if sales are going up and down, or throughput is going up and down because customers are not buying even in what we would call normal terms or normal times, right? So their buying patterns are completely off. So a lot of the folks are looking at it going, where can we make our processes more stable so that we can improve delivery times? So throughput has to be on time, to the right quality, and meet customer specs every time, right? So if you can reduce your throughput time, so your delivery or your cycle time from order entry to delivery can be reduced, then you're going to start getting more market share and start winning globally. So that has been a significant focus for a lot of my customers. The second focus has been looking at what type of data can we look at to make really good business decisions. And so, ERPs have been implemented for years, but they don't have the right dashboards or the right KPIs invisible so that management can make really good, fast decisions. And so those have been some of the key trends that I've been seeing in Canada around data usage, and then adding a layer of technology around it, and also improving processes so you get better cycle time or throughput to reduce delivery times. The client base in the U.S. that I work with, they're seeing growth. So the U.S. economy has been expanding. It's been, several, around 10 years of good growth. And so, I've seen a number of my clients go and expand through acquisitions or organically. And what they've been focusing on is, how do we get our product made right the first time so that the customer doesn't see a lower quality output in a production line or production facility. So that's been the focus for a lot of the U.S. clients. And then I have clients in Canada that have been, saying, hey, in order to also make things more even, should we expand into the U.S.? And so, they've been looking at companies to acquire or sites to set up so that, they can have a dual plant sort of thinking. So they have a footprint in the U.S. and footprint in Canada and, try to take advantage of, sort of a network in North America. And so, that's sort of where folks have been looking.
And do you do any business outside of those two countries or overseas at all, or work with plants overseas?
I did have for a little while a customer in Europe, but I tend to stay more in North America. I'm one of the things that I like to do is stay closer to home in North America rather than fly around the world like I did many years ago. So that's been more of a choice for me and my family.
Yeah, I was interviewing someone a little while ago, Brian Olton, on the show, who is also in the manufacturing space and IoT space. And it was interesting. He was talking a little bit about in China and these other countries when they first sort of entered the market, how they didn't need automation because they could just have people move stuff around, right? Labor was so cheap. They weren't going to, anything a person could do more cheaply, they would have them do, and have a robot do the really highly precise stuff that folks wouldn't be able to learn, right? Because it wasn't worth training somebody, or, it was too far behind or whatever. They didn't want to try to train them. And I think it's interesting, in the U.S. anyway, we have a problem of high labor costs, right? Or at least a challenge sometimes for manufacturers. Labor is so much higher, more expensive here than other places. But the solution is sort of the same often, right? Is to implement robotics and such to make, or at least software tools and other tools to make that labor more effective, more efficient, and do things at the right time, right the first time, like you said. Because obviously, if you've got higher costs for those folks, they can't also be redoing work. So it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic.
You raise another big issue that Canadian manufacturers are facing is they can't find skilled workers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, welders, fitters, brake press operators, you name it, they are finding it really, really difficult to find good skilled labor. And so that's driving, some automation, significant automation in some companies, because they want to move away from, having that skilled labor force. And, there's another company I went to visit, not too far from where I live, and they've invested heavily in R&D to see how they can, automate the welding processes. They don't do standard fixed product. They get engineered product and design product. So, their configuration and their setup changes often. So they want to find a way to, take away that, those welding operators and try to get it more into robotics. And, they've invested about $1 million in new technology, and they're making some strides. It's taken a while, but they're making strides. And, I'll probably go back and visit them in about a year's time and see how far along they've gotten. But they started their journey about 2 years ago. And, I was like, wow, I was impressed as to how far they've gotten along. So there is a way to take, technology and blend it so that, it works for you.
Yeah. And I've seen a big push too with manufacturers to build better sales enablement tools and sort of customer sales tools. Because a lot of times, folks have put so much innovation and automation into their factories, and they can do and create all sorts of amazing products, but how do they sell them? Mm-hmm. Well, kind of the same way they did 20 years ago. They get it on an Excel sheet, they give you a brochure, kind of not necessarily the most innovative things in the world. And so it's kind of interesting. I think there's a little bit of catch up being played on the sort of front end sales enablement, marketing side to say, well, how can we automate quoting? How can we automate, let's give the customer the ability to design, their engineered to order product, for instance. Talk about engineered products, how much lead time can we afford to have from getting this, the specs from the customer to giving them to our engineers to getting it to the factory? Like, what if we could eliminate that middleman and just have it go right to production?
Yeah.
Right. And of course, if your factories are so automated that, for instance, they can receive a CAD drawing and just start cutting, right? If it's that level, hey, there's systems that a customer could generate a CAD drawing with, obviously. So it's kind of interesting that end-to-end process is being automated more and more.
Yeah, one of my clients, now, you talk a little bit of that. They've started doing remote monitoring, and now I know remote monitoring has been out there for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. But what they're doing is similar to what you're saying, in that they're stepping back and saying, okay, how do we make this a little bit more unique? How do we make it so that we have some machine learning going on? So they're adding those types of value-added components into their software, provided the customer agrees to it. And then, they're testing it out right now to figure out what they can do with their equipment and how can it send signals to either them or the company to say, hey, this thing's about to fail, or, you're operating this a little bit differently. Here's what the impact is. Or hey, we've corrected this situation based on, our machine learning capabilities, and, here's what it means for you. We've optimized this, process for you a little bit better, right? So, they're starting to look at things a little bit differently, and this is a company that's been around for about 40 years, and they're starting to implement that, and it's been a big change for them to look at things differently.
Very interesting conversation with you, JT, and it's been great working with you over these last couple of years on projects and getting to know you. Just have such an incredibly deep background and so much experience. It's really impressive. So I really appreciate you coming on the show to talk about some of these things with me and share with our audience. So we hope we can have you on again sometime and talk further.
I would love to. Thank you very much, Sam.
It's been great, and thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for tuning in to Unstoppable Talk. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you did, be sure to support the show by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. And learn more about this show by heading over to unstoppablesoftware.com. Until next time, keep innovating.